Good morning. We're going to look at chapter 23 of Matthew this morning. And in this chapter, Jesus warns the people about the Pharisees and the scribes. He warns them about the religious leaders. I mean, you would think that they would be the people to most trust for instruction and leadership, but Jesus warns the people about them. He says, do what they teach you and follow it, but don't do what they do. So here it's, if you want to set an example, the best way you can set it an example is to do it, rather than to say one thing and do another. And this is what Jesus says that the religious leaders were doing. He says, they do not practice what they teach. They tie heavy burdens, hard to bear, and they lay them upon the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling. And I guess this chapter is another one of those places where I just have gotten to have a negative impression of the Pharisees. And sad to say that, in our world today, there are people that have the same negative impression over church people, especially church leaders, pastors and stuff that way, and we do have, there's a lot of junk that goes on in the churches. And the thing is that it doesn't matter who you are, a parishioner, a non-believer, a pastor, priest, whatever, we all sin. But Jesus is warning the disciples, the people, as he's speaking to them, that, there are so many things about the religious leaders you have to watch out for. He says they love to have the place of honor at the banquet and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have people call them rabbi, teacher, to be elevated, to be looked upon and honored. And it's one of those things that, we need to be really aware that, of who we are and how many people are looking up to us. Or, I'm not talking about just pastors and preachers. I'm talking about everybody. We, each and every one of us, by the way we live, has an impact on those around us. And whether that impact is good or bad, is what it is. Starting in verse 13, it's the woe to you. And in Luke's gospel, these woes come right after the Beatitudes. Here in Matthew's gospels, the Beatitudes were in chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. And here they're close to the end, close to the end of Jesus' life, just shortly before he's going to be arrested. And, the scribes and the Pharisees, those religious leaders, are looking for ways to get rid of Jesus because, he's just kind of upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. And but he starts, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You lock people out of the kingdom of heaven. You're making it impossible for people to meet the sacrifices and to do what they need to. You're putting an increasingly heavy burden upon the people, and that's not right. He says, for you, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you cross sea and land to make a single convert, and then you make it twice as hard for that convert. And we want to teach people about the love and the grace and the mercy of God, and rather than make it such a strict, the goody two shoes that you can't do anything. I think about, it's still somewhat today that we are not supposed to dance, we're not supposed to laugh, we're not supposed to do a lot of things, but these are a little bit more archaic, but there are still some denominations, some that follow those, that, man, to have fun. It's just, you just can't do that, but it's, you don't put a burden on someone. It's, to live a life, filled with God and filled with God's grace and love is to know that we are forgiven and that we have a loving and gracious God, not one that stands up there with a with a deal marking down every little thing, and making a tally of them, but rather that when God looks at our slate of all of the sins, they're all marked forgiven in Jesus. Verse 16, woe to you blind guides, so he's saying, you're blind to the love of God. You're blind to so much, and you're trying to lead the people. And, another place Jesus says, the blind leading the blind, you're going to fall over a cliff, and so we need to watch out and be aware. And so Jesus is really, putting it on the line to the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders. And there are 7 woes, I think, that are here. And it's just that reminder that we really need to be aware, that people see who we are, and people, judge who we are, and sometimes they judge God by who we, the believers in Jesus, are, and how we act and treat each other. And the thing is that no group of people, it seems, can ever 100% agree on something, other than maybe that, well, I don't know if they can even agree on that God is God, because there will be somebody that there is no God. So, we can't even agree on that. So it's not a surprise that there's conflict in the world because of differing opinions and differing needs and so many things that go on. But Jesus is warning the people, the common people, about the scribes and Pharisees. He's warning the scribes and the Pharisees. I guess most of the time it's worded scribes and Pharisees most times. The scribes come first, and the scribes worked under the Pharisees. The Pharisees were they were the leaders. The scribes were, probably more the people that did, some of the nitty gritty daily dirt and stuff, and they were tasked with, copying and rewriting, or I shouldn't say rewriting, recopying the scriptures and different things, so that because their scrolls would wear out, deteriorate, and they had to keep going that way. But it's just warnings. In verse 32, he says, "Fill up then the measure of your ancestors, you snakes, you brood of vipers." And this, a snake has had a negative connotation since the very beginning, with it being the snake or the serpent that tempted Adam and Eve. And I always include Adam and Eve because it says that Adam was there with her, and she gave it through, they are both implicated. There is no male superiority in the Garden of Eden that way either. "Well, you snakes, you brood of vipers," he says, "how can you escape being sentenced to hell?" And again, Jesus is talking about, that there is a different eternity. There is heaven and there is hell. There is wailing, weeping, gnashing of teeth, and there is joy untold. And then, it goes on. He says, "I sent you prophets, sages, scribes, and some of whom you will kill and crucify, some that you flog." And so he's talking about the previous prophets. He's talking about himself. He's talking about his disciples. He's talking about people in today's society that in some of the areas of the world where it's against the law to be Christian continue to find themselves arrested. And we know that the Jewish people have been persecuted, horribly badly over the years, and put down. And so, he says all of these sins are going to come down to this generation, talking again about his crucifixion. I truly believe that. And then the last part of this chapter, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophet and stones those who are sent. How often, he says, I have desired to gather your children as a hen gathers her brood, and you are not willing. You know, when you watch the wild birds, the animals, the ducks and the geese. I mean, they'll watch out and they make sure they got every one of their chicks, and the chicks come willingly and get underneath the wings of the parent bird that way. And Jesus says that we are kind of an unruly bunch, unwilling to be sheltered in the arms of God. And what a sad thing that so many refuse that shelter.